I stood in the cathedral vestibule watching my parents' Mercedes pull away from the curb and smiled. They thought I was heartbroken. They thought I was standing here alone, abandoned on the most important day of my life, tears streaming down my face as I realized my own parents couldn't even be bothered to attend my Catholic confirmation ceremony. They had no idea I wasn't even Catholic anymore. The real ceremony was happening in 3 hours across town in a small synagogue where Rabbi Cohen was waiting to welcome me into the Jewish faith, where my real family, the one I'd carefully built over the past 2 years, would be gathering to celebrate with me, where the trust fund my maternal grandmother had left me, the one my parents thought they'd successfully hidden, would finally be released into my control on my 18th birthday, which happened to be today. In my previous life, I'd spent this day sobbing in an empty cathedral, waiting for parents who never came. I'd gone home to find them at my sister Caroline's college graduation party, an event they'd scheduled on the same day as my confirmation, knowing I couldn't skip the ceremony I'd spent 2 years preparing for. In that life, I'd forgiven them. I'd made excuses. I'd spent the next decade trying to earn love that would never come. Then at 28, I'd died in a car accident caused by my sister's drunk driving. She survived without a scratch. My parents paid for her lawyers, her rehab, her fresh start. At my funeral, my mother complained about the cost of the casket, but somehow, impossibly, I woke up on my 16th birthday 2 years before this moment, with every memory of my wasted life intact. This time, I was doing things differently. "Miss, are you all right?" A young priest approached, concern creasing his forehead. Father Matthews, I remembered. He'd been kind to me in both lives. "I'm fine, Father," I said, carefully letting my voice tremble. "My parents just called. They can't make it. A family emergency." His face fell. "Oh, my dear, I'm so sorry. Would you like to postpone? Your confirmation should be a joyous occasion, shared with family." "No," I said firmly. I've prepared too long for this. I'd like to go through with it, even if I'm alone." I wasn't alone, of course. I hadn't been alone for a single moment of importance in this new life. But Father Matthews didn't need to know about the three women sitting in the back pew: Mrs. Goldstein, Mrs. Levy, and Mrs. Rosenbaum from the Jewish Community Center, wearing headscarves and watching over me like guardian angels. They'd promised to be here to bear witness to this performance because what I was about to do required witnesses. The ceremony proceeded. I knelt, I prayed, I received the bishop's blessing. The words meant nothing to me now, but I spoke them with convincing reverence. Father Matthews squeezed my shoulder afterward, his eyes sad. "Your family doesn't know what they're missing," he whispered. "No," I agreed, mine. "They really don't." I took photos, lots of photos. Me in my white confirmation dress, alone in the cathedral. Me with Father Matthews, who kindly posed despite his busy schedule. Me holding my confirmation certificate, dated and official. I posted them to social media with a carefully crafted caption. "Blessed to have completed my Catholic confirmation today. Walking in faith, even when you walk alone. Hashtag confirmed in Christ hard faith journey." My parents would see it eventually. So would everyone else in our community. It would be proof, time-stamped and public, that I'd completed the ceremony they'd forced me to begin 2 years ago. The ceremony that, in their minds, satisfied the terms of my grandmother's will, except my grandmother's will said nothing about Catholicism specifically. It required only that I complete religious coming-of-age education in a recognized faith tradition by my 18th birthday. My parents had pushed me toward Catholic confirmation because they were Catholic. It had never occurred to them that I might choose differently, but I had my grandmother's will memorized. I'd requested my own copy from the estate lawyer in this life, claiming I wanted to understand her wishes. I knew every word, every clause, every loophole. The trust fund, $2 million plus 18 years of compound interest, would be released to me today, on my 18th birthday, provided I met that single requirement. I'd met it, just not the way my parents expected. Let me take you back to where this really began, not to my death in my previous life, though that's part of it. Back to the moment I understood, truly understood what my family was. I was 4 years old the first time my mother looked at me with disappointment so profound it felt like a physical blow. Caroline, my sister, had just been born. perfect, blonde, blue-eyed Caroline who looked like a cherub and cried on cue. I was dark-haired, dark-eyed, olive-skinned. I took after my grandmother, my father's mother, the one my mother had always despised. "Why couldn't you look like your sister?" my mother murmured, holding baby Caroline and staring at me with something close to revulsion. Everything would have been so much easier. I was too young to understand. I just knew that from that moment on, I was less pretty, less important, less loved. My father was no better. A corporate lawyer who measured worth in dollar signs and status symbols, he'd wanted sons. 2 daughters were a disappointment, but at least Caroline was beautiful enough to marry well. I was the backup plan that never panned out. They spent Caroline's childhood grooming her for success, the kind of success that came from looks and charm rather than substance. Dance classes, beauty pageants, expensive clothes, professional photo shoots. She was their investment, their ticket to the kind of social standing my mother craved. I was fed, clothed, and sent to public school, while Caroline attended private academy. I was given a bedroom in the basement, while Caroline had the master suite on the second floor. I was told to be grateful for hand-me-downs while Caroline got a new wardrobe every season. When I was 12, my grandmother died. My father's mother, the one who'd always slipped me candy and told me I had her eyes. She left me everything: her estate, her savings, her investments. $2 million held in trust until my 18th birthday. I remember my parents' faces when the will was read. Shock, then calculation, then a greed so naked it made the lawyer uncomfortable. "Of course, as her parents, we'll be managing the trust until she comes of age," my father said smoothly. No. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was firm. Mrs. Sterling was very clear. The trust is sealed and managed by an independent trustee. The parents have no access, no oversight, no control. The funds will be released directly to the child on her 18th birthday, provided she meets one condition. "What condition?" my mother demanded. "That she complete religious coming-of-age education in a recognized faith tradition, a ceremony confirming her commitment to moral and spiritual development." Mr. Peterson looked at me kindly. "Your grandmother was a deeply spiritual woman. She wanted to ensure her granddaughter grew up with a strong, ethical foundation." My parents' faces had been a study in barely controlled rage. $2 million just sitting there, untouchable, going to the daughter they'd written off. That night, I heard them arguing. "We can't let her just have it," my mother hissed. "She'll waste it. She'll throw it away on some stupid degree or charity work, or—" "We'll guide her," my father said. "Once she turns 18 and gets the money, we'll convince her to invest it with my firm. I'll manage it, take the usual fees, and bleed it dry over the next decade while telling her we're making her rich." My mother's laugh was sharp. "She's not smart enough to question you. She'll trust us." "Of course she will," my father agreed. "She's desperate for our approval. She always has been." They were right. In my previous life, that's exactly what happened. I'd handed over my entire inheritance to my father's firm within a month of receiving it. He'd put it in high-yield investments that somehow never yielded much for me, while his own accounts grew fat with management fees and mysterious commissions. By the time I was 25, the trust fund was worth less than $1 million. By the time I died, it was nearly gone. But I was 16 again, with all those memories burning in my mind, and I would be damned if I let them take another penny. They pushed me into Catholic confirmation classes immediately after the will reading. It was a 2-year program at our local parish, culminating in the ceremony on one's 16th or 18th birthday. They chose 18 for me, wanting to ensure I couldn't access the money any earlier than absolutely necessary. In my previous life, I'd gone along with it. I'd attended every class, done every reading, memorized every prayer. I'd been a dutiful daughter, following the faith my parents had chosen for me, never questioning whether I even believed. This time, I went to the classes. I smiled and nodded and took notes, but I was also paying attention to everything I'd missed before. Like the fact that my grandmother had been Jewish. It was a secret she'd kept from my father, her son. She'd converted to Christianity when she married my grandfather, back when such conversions were expected, but she'd never forgotten her roots. I found evidence of it in the things she'd left me: a Star of David necklace hidden in her jewelry, Hebrew letters inscribed on the inside of her wedding band, a diary written partially in Yiddish. The diary had been in the box of personal effects Mr. Peterson gave me after the will reading. My parents had barely glanced at it. Just some old woman's journals, nothing valuable, but I'd read every page. "I pray David never knows," she'd written in one entry, dated just months before her death. "He's so thoroughly Christian now, thanks to his father's influence. But my Sarah, she has my eyes, my face, my soul. If she ever wants to know where she comes from, truly comes from, I've left her the means. The money is hers, no matter what. But the faith, that she must choose herself." Sarah. My name. She'd been writing about me. In another entry, "I've structured the trust to require religious education, but I've been careful not to specify which religion. Let them think I meant Christianity. Let them push her toward their church. But if my Sarah is anything like me, she'll find her own path, and when she does, she'll be free." My grandmother had left me an escape route. She'd known what my parents were. She'd tried to protect me. This time, I wouldn't waste her gift. At 16 years and 2 months, I walked into the Jewish Community Center in the next town over. I told them I was interested in learning about Judaism. I told them about my grandmother, showed them her diary, her Star of David. Rabbi Cohen was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a sharp mind. She listened to my story, asked me pointed questions about my motivations, and then said something that changed everything. "Conversion to Judaism is not easy, Sarah. We don't seek converts. We actually try to discourage them to ensure they're serious. It's a process that typically takes a year or more of study. You'll need to learn Hebrew, study our texts, understand our laws and customs. You'll need to convince a Beit Din, a rabbinical court, that your commitment is genuine, and you'll need to do all this while still living with your parents, who I assume don't know you're here." "They don't," I confirmed. "And they can't, not yet." "Why Judaism?" she pressed. "Is this rebellion, revenge, or something deeper?" Thought about her question carefully. In my previous life, I'd never really questioned faith. I'd gone through the motions because my parents demanded it, but now, having died and somehow been given a second chance, having lived 2 lives in one lifetime, I needed to believe in something larger than myself. "I think," I said slowly, that my grandmother saw something in me, something that belonged to her faith, not theirs. She gave me a choice, even if she couldn't say so out loud, and I want to honor that. I want to choose for myself, for the first time in my life." Rabbi Cohen studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Come back on Thursday evening. We'll start with the basics." For the next 2 years, I lived a double life. During the day and most evenings, I was the dutiful daughter attending Catholic confirmation classes, memorizing the Nicene Creed, preparing for a ceremony my parents insisted on. I complained just enough to seem genuine, but not so much they'd suspect I was planning something. But twice a week, I slipped away to the JCC. I told my parents I had a part-time job at a coffee shop. They never checked, never cared enough to verify. Instead, I was learning Hebrew, studying Torah, attending Shabbat services, and slowly, carefully, building a connection to a faith that felt like coming home. The Jewish community embraced me. These were people my grandmother might have known, might have prayed with in her youth. They fed me, taught me, argued with me about interpretations of text, and challenged me to think deeper about what I believed and why. Mrs. Goldstein, a Holocaust survivor with tattooed numbers on her arm and an unshakable faith, became like a surrogate grandmother. She taught me to make challah and told me stories about her childhood in Poland before the war destroyed everything. Mrs. Levy, a convert herself, understood the complexity of choosing a new faith while honoring your past. She guided me through the emotional aspects of conversion, the guilt and doubt and eventual peace. Mrs. Rosenbaum, the youngest of the 3 at 70, was a firecracker who'd been a civil rights lawyer in the 60s. She taught me that Judaism wasn't just about prayer and tradition. It was about justice, about speaking truth to power, about protecting the vulnerable. Tikkun olam, she'd say, her eyes fierce. Repair the world, that's our job. Not to wait for someone else to fix what's broken, but to fix it ourselves. They knew about my parents. I told them everything: the neglect, the favoritism, the money, my planned revenge. I half expected them to tell me I was wrong, that revenge was un-Jewish, that I should forgive. Instead, Mrs. Rosenbaum laughed, sharp and approving. Let me tell you something, Shayna Madel. There's a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is hurting someone because you want them to suffer. Justice is ensuring they face consequences for their actions. What you're planning, that's justice. Plus, Mrs. Goldstein added with a sly smile, Moses did say an eye for an eye. We interpret it metaphorically now, but the principle stands. They tried to steal from you, control you, break you. You're just taking back what's yours. Rabbi Cohen was more cautious. Justice is important, she agreed. But so is your soul. Don't let anger consume you, Sarah. Use your second chance to build something good, not just to tear down something bad. I'm not just tearing down, I promised. I'm building. I'm becoming someone my grandmother would be proud of. And I was. As I studied, as I learned, as I became part of this community, I felt myself changing. In my previous life, I'd been a victim, defined by what others did to me. In this life, I was choosing. I was becoming. When I finally stood before the Beit Din, 3 rabbis, including Rabbi Cohen, to discuss my readiness for conversion, I wasn't nervous. I'd spent 2 years preparing for this moment. They asked me about Jewish law, about holidays, about Hebrew prayers. They asked me why I wanted to convert, what I understood about the responsibilities of being Jewish, how I planned to maintain my practice. I answered honestly. I told them about my grandmother, about her hidden faith, about the choice she'd given me. I told them that Judaism felt like the missing piece of my identity, the part of myself I'd been searching for without knowing it. I told them I wanted to be part of a tradition that valued questioning, that demanded justice, that made space for doubt alongside faith. Rabbi Cohen asked the final question. Your parents don't know you're converting. What will happen when they find out? They'll be angry, I said calmly. They'll feel deceived, but I'm not doing this to hurt them. I'm doing this because it's right for me. My grandmother gave me the freedom to choose. I'm choosing. The rabbis stepped out to deliberate. When they returned, Rabbi Cohen was smiling. We believe your commitment is genuine. We'll proceed with your conversion. The mikveh ceremony happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before my 18th birthday. I immersed myself in the ritual bath, saying the blessings in Hebrew, emerging as something new and ancient at once. The Hebrew name I chose was Shoshana, after my grandmother's own Hebrew name, the one she'd stopped using when she converted away. I was now Sarah Shoshana Sterling, Jewish by choice, heir to my grandmother's hidden legacy. My official Bet Din ceremony, the formal confirmation before witnesses, was scheduled for my 18th birthday, the same day as my Catholic confirmation, the day my trust fund would be released. I planned it perfectly. My parents had been busy planning Caroline's college graduation party for months. She was finishing her bachelor's degree at a prestigious university, paid for entirely by them, of course. The party was going to be huge. Rented venue, catered food, 200 guests, a string quartet. They scheduled it for my 18th birthday. When I pointed this out, my mother waved a hand dismissively. Your confirmation is in the morning. The party isn't until evening. You'll be done by then. Will you come? I asked, even though I already knew the answer from my previous life. To the confirmation? My father frowned. We'll try, but we have to oversee the setup for Caroline's party, you understand. I understood perfectly. They were going to skip my confirmation to focus on Caroline's celebration, just like before. Of course, I said meekly. Caroline's party is more important. My mother looked almost surprised by my easy acquiescence. She should have been suspicious. The old me would have fought, would have cried, would have begged, but I'd learned to play a better game. The morning of my 18th birthday, I woke early. I got dressed in the white confirmation dress my parents had bought me. They'd at least done that much, though it was off the clearance rack while Caroline's graduation dress cost $3,000. I drove myself to the cathedral. I went through the ceremony, took my photos, posted them online. I collected my confirmation certificate and thanked Father Matthews for his kindness. Then I drove across town to the synagogue. The JCC community had outdone themselves. The synagogue was decorated with flowers, with banners saying Mazel Tov Shoshana in Hebrew and English. Tables were laden with food, challah, kugel, rugelach, all the foods I'd learned to love over the past 2 years. 50 people had come to celebrate with me. 50 people who'd watched me study, who'd supported my journey, who'd become my real family. Rabbi Cohen performed the ceremony. I stood before the ark wrapped in a tallit, a prayer shawl that had belonged to my grandmother, which I'd found in her belongings and had restored. I read from the Torah in Hebrew, my voice steady. I spoke about my journey, about choosing to honor my grandmother's hidden faith, about finding myself in a tradition that welcomed questions and demanded justice. When I finished, the congregation erupted in applause. Mrs. Goldstein was crying. Mrs. Levy pulled me into a fierce hug. Mrs. Rosenbaum whispered, "Your grandmother is kvelling in heaven." After the ceremony, Mr. Peterson, my grandmother's lawyer, approached me with a briefcase. He'd been invited specifically for this moment. "Miss Sterling," he said formally, though his eyes were twinkling. "Or should I say Shoshana?" "Sarah is fine," I said. "Though I appreciate the recognition. Your grandmother would be incredibly proud." He opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "You've met the terms of the trust. Here is documentation of your Jewish education, your conversion, and your ceremony today. The trust fund will be released to your personal account within 24 hours. Current value, $2,700,000. The community members nearby gasped. They'd known about the trust fund, but not the amount. "Additionally," Mayor Peterson continued, "there's a sealed letter from your grandmother. She instructed me to give it to you only if you chose to explore your Jewish heritage. She seems to have anticipated this possibility." He handed me an envelope yellowed with age. With shaking hands, I opened it. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, you've chosen the path I hoped you would but could never force you to take. I'm so proud of you. I'm sorry I had to hide this part of myself from your father, from your mother, from everyone. But the world I grew up in didn't accept women like me, Jewish women who married outside the faith. I chose survival, and I don't regret it. But I always hoped you might choose differently. The money is yours no matter what. But if you found your way to our faith, there's something else you should know. I didn't just leave you money, I left you property. When I was young, before I married, my parents gave me a building in the city. I never sold it, even when times were hard. I kept it, maintained it through a property management company, and let the rent accumulate. Your parents don't know it exists. The property is held in a separate trust, one they can't access or contest. It's yours now. A 6-story building in the heart of the city with commercial space on the ground floor and apartments above. Current value, as of this writing, is approximately $4 million. Current rental income is approximately $30,000 per month. Use it wisely, my darling girl. Use it to build the life you deserve. Use it to do good in the world. Use it to be free. All my love, Bubby." I looked up at Mr. Peterson, stunned. Is this real?" "Very real. The property has been generating income for years. That money has been accumulating in a separate account, also released to you today. An additional $1,200,000 in rental income, after management fees and property maintenance. $4 million counting everything. Almost $5 million. I was rich. I was free. The party lasted for hours. We danced, we sang, we ate until we couldn't move. I was surrounded by people who loved me, who'd chosen me, who'd helped me become who I was meant to be. Around 7 p.m., my phone started buzzing. Text messages from my mother, increasingly angry. "Where are you? You were supposed to be here an hour ago. Caroline's party started at 6. You're embarrassing us. Get here now." I ignored them and kept celebrating. At midnight, I drove home. The house was dark except for the living room where my parents sat waiting. Caroline was already upstairs, probably passed out from too much champagne. "Where the hell were you?" my father demanded. "Do you have any idea how you embarrassed us tonight? Everyone asking where you were, and we had to make excuses." "I was at my confirmation party," I said calmly. The one celebrating. My coming-of-age ceremony. You know, the ceremony you didn't bother to attend. We explained that we had Caroline's party, my mother started. You did. You chose her party over my confirmation. I chose to celebrate without you. My father's face was reddening. Don't take that tone with me. You're still living under my roof, eating my food. Not for long. I pulled out my phone and showed them a screenshot of my bank account. My trust fund was released today. $2,700,000. Congratulations. Your job of raising me is officially over. They stared at the screen. My mother's face went pale. My father's went from red to purple. You'll invest that with my firm, my father said flatly. I'll set up a meeting for Monday. No, I won't. Sarah, don't be stupid. You don't know how to manage that kind of money. You need professional help. I have professional help. Financial advisors who aren't related to me and don't charge exorbitant fees for mediocre returns. I've already moved the money into managed accounts with Vanguard, low fees, diversified portfolio, and absolutely no access for family members. I'd spent hours researching investments in my previous life after it was too late. This time, I'd done my homework before the money hit my account. My mother found her voice. You ungrateful little bitch. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me? I laughed, and it was a harsh sound. You've clothed me in Caroline's cast-offs and fed me the cheapest food you could find. You sent me to public school while she went to private academy. You gave her the master suite and stuck me in the basement. You've made it clear my entire life that I'm the disappointing daughter, the ugly duckling, the one who doesn't matter. That's not true, my mother said, but her voice was weak. It is true. And I'm done with it. I'm moving out. I found an apartment, already signed the lease. I'll be out of here by the end of the week. You're not going anywhere, my father said. I'm your father, and you'll do what I say. I'm 18, legally an adult. You have no say anymore. Then you're on your own. Don't come crying to us when you blow through that money and end up homeless. I won't blow through it. In fact, I'm going to do very well for myself. I paused, savoring this moment. Oh, and one more thing. I'm not Catholic anymore. The silence was deafening. What? My mother whispered. I converted to Judaism. 2 years ago, actually. I've been attending synagogue, studying Torah, learning Hebrew. Today I had my official Bet Din ceremony. I'm Jewish now, just like my grandmother was. Your grandmother was Christian, my father snapped. She converted when she married my father. She was born Jewish. She converted because she had to, because your grandfather demanded it. But she never forgot where she came from. She left me her heritage, the one you tried to erase, and I claimed it. You lied to us, my mother said. All those confirmation classes, I attended every single one. I completed the ceremony this morning, just like you demanded. I got the certificate you needed to prove I met the terms of the trust. Then I went to my real ceremony, the one that actually mattered to me. I pulled out my phone again. I have photos from both, time-stamped, geotagged, posted to social media. The Catholic confirmation that satisfied the trust requirements, and the Jewish Bet Din that satisfied my soul. This is insane, my father said. You're having some kind of breakdown. You need help. I'm perfectly sane. In fact, I'm probably the sanest I've ever been. I headed for the stairs, then stopped. Oh, and you might want to recalculate your retirement plans. You won't be getting any of my money to manage. Not now, not ever. I went downstairs rather, to my basement room and started packing. I didn't have much worth taking. A few clothes, some books, my laptop. Most of my important possessions were already in my new apartment. My mother came down an hour later. She looked older than I'd ever seen her, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Sarah, she said quietly, I know we haven't always been perfect parents, but we did our best. We loved you in our own way. No, I said, yeah. You loved Caroline. You tolerated me. There's a difference. That's not fair, isn't it? Name one time, one single time you chose me over her. One recital you attended, one birthday party you threw, one moment when I was the priority. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She couldn't. We both knew it. I'm not angry anymore, I said, and I meant it. The rage that had consumed me after my death, after my rebirth, had burned itself out over the past 2 years. What remained was something colder and clearer: determination. I don't hate you, I just don't need you. My grandmother gave me a gift, not just money, but a choice. I chose myself. I chose freedom. I chose a family that actually wants me. Your Jewish friends, my mother said bitterly. That's not a real family. They're more real than you ever were. I zipped my suitcase. I'm leaving now. I'll be back for the rest of my things tomorrow. Your father won't allow it. My father has no choice. I'm an adult. If he tries to stop me, I'll call the police. I looked at her directly. I know you thought you'd get my trust fund eventually. I know that was the plan. Convince me to invest with Dad, let him bleed it dry with fees and bad investments, and eventually I'd be dependent on you again. It's what happened before. Before? I smiled. Before I got smart. Goodbye, Mom. I walked out of that house and never looked back. The next few months were a revelation. I moved into a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in the city, walking distance from the synagogue and my new community. I enrolled in college, a good one I'd wanted to attend in my previous life but couldn't afford because my parents had spent their money on Caroline. This time, I paid cash. No student loans, no debt, no strings attached. I also started getting involved with my grandmother's building. The property manager had been doing a decent job, but I had ideas. I renovated the ground floor commercial space and turned it into a community center, a place for after-school programs, job training, and support services for neighborhood families. Mrs. Rosenbaum helped me set up a nonprofit to run it. Mrs. Levy taught me the basics of property management. Mrs. Goldstein volunteered to run a cooking program, teaching immigrant families how to make traditional foods from their home countries. We called it the Shoshana Center after my grandmother. It became my life's work, my purpose, my way of doing tikkun olam, repairing the world. My parents tried to contact me a few times in those first months. My father sent legal threats claiming I'd defrauded them by pretending to be Catholic. His lawyer laughed him out of the office. I'd completed a valid Catholic confirmation ceremony, met all the terms of the trust, and done nothing illegal. My mother tried emotional manipulation, crying about how much they missed me. I didn't respond. Missing someone requires actually caring about them, and she'd proven she didn't. Caroline was the most persistent. She showed up at my apartment 6 months after I moved out, looking haggard and desperate. I need money, she said without preamble. Mom and Dad cut me off. Why? Because they're broke, she laughed wildly. Dad's firm is being investigated for fraud. Something about embezzling client funds. They might lose everything. And they kept asking me to help, to get money from you since we're sisters. But I told them you'd never listen to me, and they got mad and— Slow down, I said. Dad's being investigated? The SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, they think he's been running a Ponzi scheme for years, paying old clients with money from new clients. It's a whole thing. He might go to jail. I felt a cold satisfaction spread through my chest. In my previous life, I'd been one of those clients. My trust fund had gone into his scheme, and I'd never known. This time, by refusing to invest with him, I'd protected myself and probably helped expose him. I'm sorry that's happening, I said carefully. But I can't help you. Can't or won't? Caroline's eyes were red-rimmed. I'm your sister, Sarah. I know we weren't close, but nothing. You've had every advantage, every privilege, every dollar our parents could spare. They chose you over me every single day of our lives. Now you want me to bail you out because suddenly money's tight? No, figure it out yourself. You're so cold now, she whispered. What happened to you? I grew up, I said. I stopped waiting for scraps from a family that didn't want me. I built something better. She left, crying. Didn't follow her. A year after my conversion, the consequences of my parents' choices became public. My father was arrested, tried, and convicted of securities fraud. He got 15 years in federal prison. My mother, who'd helped him hide assets, got 5. Caroline spiraled. Without their financial support, without the cushion of family wealth, she couldn't maintain the lifestyle she'd grown up with. She bounced between jobs, between apartments, between boyfriends who promised to save her. She never asked me for help again. 2 years after my rebirth, Rabbi Cohen called me into her office. "I have a question for you," she said, "and I want you to think carefully before answering." "All right." "Do you still feel angry at your parents?" "At Caroline?" "I considered this." "No, I feel nothing. They're strangers who share my DNA. Their lives don't affect mine anymore." "Good, because I'm worried about you, Shoshana." "Why?" "Because justice is important, but so is joy. You've spent 2 years building something good, the community center, your education, your place in our congregation. But I see you working constantly, planning constantly, always focused on the next goal. When do you rest? When do you just live?" I didn't have an answer. "Your grandmother gave you a gift," Rabbi Cohen continued. "Not just money or property or a faith tradition. She gave you the freedom to choose the kind of life you wanted. I'm asking, what kind of life do you want? Not what kind of revenge, not what kind of justice, what kind of joy?" The question haunted me for weeks. What did I want beyond proving my family wrong? Beyond building my grandmother's legacy? Beyond surviving and thriving? I started small. I joined a book club at the synagogue. I took a painting class. I went on dates, awkward, fumbling dates with people who didn't know my history, who just saw me as Sarah, a normal 20-year-old with a normal life. I made friends outside the congregation, college classmates, neighbors, people from the community center. I learned to laugh again, not with the bitter satisfaction of revenge, but with genuine happiness. 3 years after my rebirth, I met Daniel at a Shabbat dinner. He was a rabbinical student, funny and kind and genuinely interested in my story. We dated for a year before he proposed, and we married in the same synagogue where I'd been converted. Mrs. Goldstein, Mrs. Levy, and Mrs. Rosenbaum were my unofficial grandmothers at the wedding, standing with me under the chuppah. Rabbi Cohen performed the ceremony. My college friends filled the seats, along with what felt like the entire JCC community. My parents weren't invited. Caroline wasn't invited. They weren't part of my life anymore, and I'd made peace with that. 4 years after my rebirth, Daniel and I had our first child, a daughter. We named her Shoshana after my grandmother. When I held her for the first time, I understood something I'd never quite grasped before. My grandmother hadn't left me money to make me rich. She'd left me money to make me free. Free to choose, free to build, free to become whoever I was meant to be. And I'd chosen well. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Caroline had finally gotten her life together. She'd gone back to school, gotten a degree in social work, and was working with troubled youth. My father was still in prison, but eligible for parole in a few years. My mother had completed her sentence and was living in a small apartment, working retail. I didn't reach out. Maybe that made me cold. Maybe it made me cruel. But they'd had 18 years to love me, and they'd chosen not to. I'd given them every chance in my previous life, and they'd wasted it. This life was different. This life was mine. 5 years after my rebirth, the Shoshana Center won a Community Service Award. I stood on stage, accepting the plaque, and looked out at the audience. Mrs. Goldstein, Mrs. Levy, and Mrs. Rosenbaum were in the front row, beaming. Daniel was recording on his phone, our daughter asleep in her carrier. Rabbi Cohen gave me a thumbs up. These were my people. This was my family. This was my choice. The interviewer asked me where I'd gotten the inspiration for the center. "From my grandmother," I said. "She taught me that we all have a responsibility to repair the world, to protect the vulnerable, to create spaces where people can become who they're meant to be. She gave me that opportunity, and I'm trying to give it to others." "And your parents?" the interviewer asked. "Are they here to celebrate with you?" "My parents," I said carefully, taught me what not to be. Sometimes That's just as valuable as a positive example. The audience laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. That night, scrolling through social media, I saw that Caroline had commented on a post about the award. "So proud of my sister," she'd written. "She's doing amazing things." I stared at the comment for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond, to build a bridge, to let her back into my life. She'd been a victim too, in her own way, molded and manipulated by parents who valued beauty over substance, who'd set her up for a fall. But I didn't. Because she'd had choices too, all along. She could have been kind to me. She could have shared. She could have been a sister instead of a competitor. She'd chosen differently, and we'd both had to live with those choices. 6 years after my rebirth, I stood in a hospital room holding my grandmother's namesake, watching as my second daughter came into the world. We named her Ruth after Ruth the Moabite, who'd chosen to convert to Judaism and became one of the most revered figures in our tradition. "Welcome to the family," I whispered to her. "You're going to have so much love, so much freedom, so many choices." Daniel squeezed my hand. "You're an amazing mother." "I'm trying," I said. "I'm trying to give them what I never had, unconditional love, the certainty that they matter, the freedom to become whoever they want to be." "You're succeeding," he assured me. I hoped he was right. 7 years after my rebirth, I got a letter from my father. He'd been granted early release for good behavior and wanted to meet. He'd found religion in prison, he said. He'd changed. He wanted to apologize. I thought about it for a week, then wrote back, "No, I didn't owe him forgiveness. I didn't owe him a chance to ease his conscience. He'd had 18 years to be a father, and he'd failed. His redemption arc, if he wanted one, would have to happen without me." My mother sent flowers on my birthday. I donated them to a nursing home. Caroline sent a card when my second daughter was born. I filed it away without responding. They were trying in their own inadequate ways to rebuild what they'd broken. But some things, once shattered, can't be put back together. You can only build something new. 10 years after my rebirth, I sat in synagogue on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, listening to the Kol Nidre prayer. It's a prayer about vows, about the promises we make and fail to keep, about the commitments we struggle to honor. I thought about my grandmother, who'd made a vow to convert to Christianity and kept it for decades, even as it tore at her soul. I thought about my parents, who'd made vows to love and cherish both their daughters and broken those vows every day. I thought about my own vows, to honor my grandmother's legacy, to build something good, to be the parent I'd never had. I was keeping those vows, every day, in every way I could. After the service, Mrs. Goldstein pulled me aside. She was 90 now, moving slower but still sharp as a tack. "I want you to know something," she said. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you, not just for the money you've used wisely, or the center you've built, or the family you've created, for the person you've become." "I'm still angry sometimes," I admitted. "I see families being kind to each other, and I wonder why mine couldn't do that. Why I had to fight so hard just to be seen." "Of course you're angry. Anger isn't wrong. It's what you do with it that matters." She patted my hand. "You turned your anger into action. You took your pain and transformed it into something that helps others. That's the best kind of revenge. Living well, loving fully, and making the world a little bit better." "Is that really revenge?" I asked. "Or is it just moving on?" "Maybe," she said with a smile. "They're the same thing." 15 years after my rebirth, I stood at Mrs. Goldstein's funeral. She had died peacefully in her sleep at 95, surrounded by family and friends. I eulogized her as the grandmother I'd chosen, the woman who'd taught me that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up, who stay, who love you, not for what you can give them, but for who you are. Mrs. Levy and Mrs. Rosenbaum sat in the front row holding hands, crying. They'd been my guides, my teachers, my surrogate family for 15 years. They'd helped me become who I was. At the Shiva, people told stories about Mrs. Goldstein's life, her escape from Poland, her arrival in America with nothing but a suitcase and hope, her determination to build a new life, a good life, a life that honored the family she'd lost. She used to say, Mrs. Levy told the gathered mourners, That the best revenge against the people who tried to destroy her was to live fully, to love deeply, to create beauty and meaning out of the ashes. She did that, and she taught Sarah to do it too. People nodded. They knew my story, most of it anyway. They knew I'd been estranged from my birth family, that I'd built something new here. They didn't know about the rebirth, the second chance, the memories of a life lived wrong and then lived right. That was my secret, mine alone. 20 years after my rebirth, Daniel and I celebrated our 17th wedding anniversary. Our daughters were teenagers now. Shoshana was studious and serious, already talking about becoming a rabbi like Daniel. Ruth was artistic and rebellious, determined to be a filmmaker. They were so different from each other, and I loved them both fiercely, equally, without reservation. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked me that night as we sat on our balcony overlooking the city. "Cutting off your parents?" "No," I said. "I grieve what could have been. I grieve the family I should have had. But I don't regret choosing myself, choosing us, choosing this life." "They missed out on so much," he said. "These amazing kids, this amazing life. All because they couldn't see past their own prejudices and preferences." "Their loss," I agreed. "I'd spent my whole first life trying to earn love from people who couldn't give it. This time, I surrounded myself with people who loved me freely. That made all the difference." 25 years after my rebirth, I attended Caroline's wedding. She'd invited me, sending a handwritten note that was surprisingly mature and self-aware. She'd been in therapy for years, she said. She understood now how dysfunctional our family had been. She didn't expect me to forgive her, but she wanted me to know she was sorry. I went. I sat in the back. I watched her marry a decent man who worked as a teacher, who looked at her like she mattered. Their wedding was small, intimate, nothing like the lavish parties our parents used to throw. Afterward, she approached me. "Thank you for coming." "Congratulations," I said. "I hope you're happy." "I am, or I'm working on it anyway." She paused. "I don't expect us to be close. I know I was awful to you, and I can't undo that. But I wanted you to know I understand now. Why you left, why you cut us off. You were protecting yourself. I respect that." "Thank you," I said. And I meant it. We didn't become friends. We didn't rebuild a sisterly relationship. But we reached a kind of peace, and Mama's acknowledgement that we'd both been damaged by the same parents, that we'd both survived in our own ways, it was enough. 30 years after my rebirth, I celebrated my 48th birthday. I'd outlived my previous life by 20 years. 20 years of choices, of freedom, of joy mixed with struggle and sorrow. The Shoshana Center was thriving, now operating 5 locations across the city. My daughters were adults. Shoshana was an assistant rabbi at a congregation in California. Ruth was a documentary filmmaker whose work focused on immigrant communities. Daniel and I were grandparents. Shoshana had given us twin boys, and Ruth was pregnant with her first child. My parents were both dead. My father had died in prison of a heart attack. My mother had died a few years later, alone in her apartment. I'd gone to their funerals, stood in the back, and felt nothing. Not grief, not anger, not relief, just a quiet acknowledgement that they'd existed, that they'd shaped me in ways both harmful and instructive, and that their chapter of my life was closed. I'd learned to forgive them, not for their sake, but for mine. Forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. It didn't mean forgetting. It just meant releasing the anger that could have poisoned my happiness, choosing peace over rage. On my birthday, Rabbi Cohen, now retired but still sharp at 93, came to dinner. "I've been thinking about your story," she said over dessert, "about the choice your grandmother gave you, about everything you've built." "And?" I prompted. "And I think you've lived the best possible revenge. Not because you hurt the people who hurt you, but because you proved them wrong about who you were, what you were worth, what you could become. You took their rejection and turned it into liberation. That's powerful." "It's also exhausting," I admitted with a laugh. "Some days I wish I could just be bitter and angry. It would be simpler." "But not nearly as satisfying," she countered. "Bitterness eats at the soul. Joy sustains it. You chose joy even when it was hard. That's heroism." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who'd been given an impossible gift, a second chance at life, and tried her best not to waste it. 35 years after my rebirth, I received an unexpected letter. It was from a lawyer informing me that Caroline had died. Cancer, sudden and aggressive. She'd left me something in her will. I attended her funeral, more out of duty than affection. Her husband spoke about her kindness, her dedication to her work with troubled youth, her late life transformation from shallow society girl to compassionate social worker. It was a life well lived, I thought. Not the life our parents had planned for her, but a good one nonetheless. Her husband approached me after the service. She wanted you to have this. He handed me a box. Inside were photos, hundreds of them, from our childhood. Pictures I'd never seen, moments I didn't remember. In many of them, Caroline was looking at me with something that might have been envy, might have been admiration, might have been the complicated love of a sibling who didn't know how to express it. There was also a letter. Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope my death was quick and that I didn't suffer too much. But more than that, I hope I left the world a little better than I found it. I need you to know that I spent most of my life jealous of you. Not of your money, that came later, but of your strength, your certainty, your ability to walk away from people who hurt you. I never had that. I was weak. I let mom and dad shape me into exactly what they wanted, and when they fell apart, I fell apart with them. It took me years to build myself back up. You did it in one clean break. You knew your worth, and you demanded that others recognize it. I admired that, even when I hated you for it. I'm sorry I wasn't a better sister. I'm sorry I stood by while they hurt you. I'm sorry I benefited from your suffering. But I'm not sorry you left. You deserved better. You deserved everything you built. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to start over, to choose differently, to become someone new. I couldn't have done the work I did without your example. Love. Caroline, I cried, reading it. Not for the sister I'd never had, but for the one I might have had if things had been different. If our parents had loved us both. If we'd been allies instead of competitors. But that was a different life, a different story. In this life, we'd both survived and found our own kinds of happiness. That had to be enough. 40 years after my rebirth, I retired from active management of the Shoshana Center. I'd built it into something sustainable, something that would outlive me. Younger hands were ready to take over, to bring new ideas and new energy. I spent my days with my grandchildren, teaching them the lessons my grandmother had tried to teach me, about the importance of choice, about the power of creating your own family, about the responsibility to repair the world, one small act at a time. They were growing up so loved, so secure, so confident. They would never know what it felt like to be unwanted, to be secondary, to be less. I'd made sure of that. Daniel and I traveled to Israel, to Poland, to all the places my grandmother had told me about in her diary. We walked through the remains of destroyed synagogues, stood at memorials for communities wiped out, and honored the lives that had been lost. We also celebrated the lives that continued, the traditions that survived, the faith that endured despite everything. 45 years after my rebirth, on my 63rd birthday, I stood at my grandmother's grave. It had been 4.5 decades since she'd died, since she'd left me the gift that changed everything. I did it, Bubby, I whispered. I built the life you wanted for me. I honored your legacy. I chose myself, and I chose joy, and I chose to make the world a little bit better. The gravestone was weathered but still legible. Shoshana Bat Avraham, beloved mother, grandmother, and keeper of faith. Thank you, I said. For everything. For the money, yes. But more for the choice. For believing I was strong enough to take it. For trusting me with your hidden truth. A wind rustled through the cemetery trees. I liked to imagine it was her response, her approval, her blessing. I left a stone on her grave, as is our custom. A stone that said, I was here, I remember, you mattered. 50 years after my rebirth, I turned 66. I was officially older in this life than I'd ever been in my previous one. Everything from here was bonus time, a gift, an extension I'd never expected. My great-grandchildren were being born. Shoshana's twins were having children of their own. Ruth's daughter was engaged. The family tree I'd built, branch by branch, was flourishing. At a family Shabbat dinner, my grandson asked me about my parents. I know you don't talk about them, he said carefully, but I'm curious. What were they like? I thought about how to answer. I could tell him the truth, that they were cruel, neglectful, abusive, that they'd chosen one daughter over another, that they'd tried to steal from me, that they'd failed at every measure of what parents should be. But what was the point of passing on that bitterness? They were complicated, I said finally. They made choices I didn't agree with. We became estranged when I was young, but their failures taught me important lessons about what kind of parent, what kind of person I wanted to be. Do you wish things had been different? Sometimes. But if things had been different, I might have become different too. I might not have found your great-great-grandmother's faith. I might not have built the community center. I might not have married your grandfather or had your grandmother. Everything in my life came from that break, that choice to walk away and build something new. So you don't regret it? Not for a second. He nodded, satisfied. The younger children returned to their play. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. You did good, he murmured. We did good, I corrected. All of us, together. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the two lives I'd lived. The first, where I'd been a victim, a disappointment, a daughter who died unloved and unmourned. The second, where I'd been a fighter, a builder, a woman who'd taken the worst moment of her life and transformed it into the best decision she'd ever made. If I could send a message back to that 16-year-old girl, standing in her grandmother's lawyer's office, learning about the trust fund and the will and the single condition, what would I say? Choose yourself. Choose freedom. Choose the family that chooses you back. It won't be easy. It will hurt, and you'll doubt yourself, and you'll wonder if you're doing the right thing, but do it anyway. Walk away from people who can't love you. Build something better. Honor the woman who gave you a choice by making the choice that honors you. And most importantly, let them skip your confirmation. Let them prioritize someone else, something else, anything else. Because while they're busy proving they don't care, you'll be across town, surrounded by people who do, claiming the life you were always meant to have. That's the best revenge. That's the only revenge that matters. Living well, loving fully, choosing joy. I fell asleep with a smile on my face, grateful for every day of this second life, this better life, this life I'd chosen for myself. The trust fund had been the beginning. The conversion had been the turning point. But the real victory, the lasting victory, was this. I'd become someone my grandmother would be proud of, someone I was proud of, and my parents, wherever they were, had missed all of it. Their loss, my gain, perfect.